Sarah van Gelder now, the co-founder and executive director of Yes magazine, which I think more than any periodical in the United States has tried to create space for historically oppressed groups and views from those communities which have earned their strengths the hard way through difficulty and suffering. The news in this country always seems so overwhelmingly bad or maddeningly irrelevant. It's true that there's a lot of heavy stuff coming down the pike, no mistake about it. But it's also true that there are lots of big, beautiful ideas and efforts and successes happening everywhere, including many communities that don't get much news coverage. But it's all unnoticed by the mainstream media or deliberately suppressed by the mainstream media. So enter Yes magazine and enter Sarah van Gelder's work. As the co-founder and executive director of Yes, Sarah gets the very cool job of framing each issue, meeting with her staff and deciding what kind of pieces they're going to seek out to cover those issues. Sarah blogs on the Yes site and for Huffington Post and elsewhere. She writes some of the main feature articles and always a lead article for each issue. We're happy that we could set it up so that Sarah's going to get to interview Tim DeChristopher this afternoon, and we'll see that in a future issue of Yes magazine. That's very exciting for us. We're happy about that. The staff from Yes sent down a bunch of boxes of a past issue, so they're free sample issues of Yes. If you don't know it, you need to, and you pick up a sample issue at our intro table out in the foyer. Here are a couple of titles of Sarah's most recent stories and blogs. 10 ways to support the Occupy movement. 4 ways to leap the fiscal cliff. How to fix health care without the popular mandate. Why truly affordable care means single payer. Yeah. 9 stories that will change your world. Stories. That's what is going to change the world. Stories of the good work that people in this room are doing. Stories of groups who are too poor to make it here today, or maybe some from people who did go to great lengths to be here today. Stories, a new vision of how we're going to embody those values and that community support that Tim so eloquently talked about. What are the stories that are already out there that embrace that, and what new ones can we discover and foreground? And as they emerge, we're going to hear about them in Yes magazine. Sarah walks her talk. She rode the Amtrak down here from her home in Washington. She works closely with the Suquamish tribe on whose land she dwells, and she's an exemplary human being. Please help me welcome Sarah van Gelder.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to the Spring Creek Project for inviting me. I have to say I was a little daunted by realizing I was going to be on the same stage with one of my heroes, Tim DeChristopher. What an extraordinary example to us all, and what an extraordinary human being. And among other things, I appreciate the courage to tell those difficult truths that we may or may not really want to be hearing. I want to talk today about where our power comes from, because we know how bad things are getting. The people in this room came here. I mean, you understood when you saw apocalypse in the title of this symposium. You understood what that meant. you understood what's happening with the climate, what's happening with the massive extinctions that are happening all over the planet. And the thing about it is that we know what the solutions are. Among us, we could probably spend a few hours, break up into small groups. We could identify the main solutions to climate change because they're not rocket science. Can anybody throw out a few solutions? Come off.
Get rid of capitalism.
Okay, get rid of capitalism. Yeah. What's that? Changing our food system, absolutely.
Get rid of coal and dirty fuels and let people get affordable cars for poor people that can thrive and not pollute the environment.
Okay, get rid of coal, and we need clean cars. Any others? Carbon tax. Reduce consumption. Okay, so we could do this, right? We know what needs to be done. And not only that, not only do we know, but the American people know. If you look at public opinion polls, over 80% of Americans want action on climate change. It's not just Democrats, it's not just liberals. If you ask Republicans, 55% want us to regulate CO2. 55%. So yes, there's the climate deniers out there, but a majority of Americans want action. So we have the solutions. We're not being threatened by some kind of asteroid from outer space. We're being threatened by our own actions. We know what needs to be done. We have public opinion behind us. Why aren't we getting this done? Where is our power? I think the place where we're going to find our power is in finding our place, finding our geographic place, our communities, deepening our relationships for the hard, hard work that there is to come. You know, Archimedes, the Greek philosopher and mathematician, once said, "Give me a place to stand and I'll move the earth." And most people think about that in terms of levers and, you know, how much can you move with a lever if you have a place to, you know. But think about the first part of that. If I have a place to stand, what does it mean when we have a place to stand? When our relationships are so deep and so sustaining that we have a place to stand. I want to tell you a couple of stories from my own life that have taught me lessons about that. Charles mentioned that I live on the Suquamish Indian Reservation just across the Puget Sound from Seattle. I moved there about 14 years ago. And one of the things that happened shortly after I got there is I noticed that there's a beautiful inlet called Dyes Inlet. If you go there, you'll see Salmon Creek with salmon running up the river. You'll see herons, cormorants, sometimes you'll see orcas. But what you won't see was that this water was badly polluted. If you look past the beauty of the sand and the water, you'll see why. The entire land surrounding it is strip malls, it's parking lots, it's acres and acres of roadway. So of course all of that is flowing into this waterway. And the clams that have been part of the tribe's historic treaty rights to harvest were not clean enough to eat. So I look at that as sort of a newcomer and somebody deeply enmeshed in the dominator worldview and the pioneer mentality, and I think, oh, wow, that's really too bad. Move on somewhere else. There's got to be somewhere else where the clams are clean. I don't say that out loud, but that's what I'm thinking. I feel the grief of knowing that water isn't clean, but my assumption is you just have to give up on that. There's too much pavement. It's never going to happen. Well, of course, the tribe sees it in a completely different way. They have a staff of biologists. They have policy folks on staff. They work with the developers. They work with the governments. They work even with the U.S. Navy. And a while ago, I saw a little notice in the tribal newsletter. Time to go out and dig clams in Dyes Inlet. The water's cleaned up now. And that taught me a lesson. It taught me a lesson that there is no such thing as a sacrifice zone. We can't give up on anywhere. Wendell Berry says there is there are only two types of land. There's sacred land and there's desecrated land. We need to take those desecrated pieces of land and turn them back into the clean, sacred land they were always intended to be. So we're learning a new relationship with Mother Earth. You know, the Francis Bacon talked about the need to conquer nature, the need to subdue nature. There's almost a sexist tinge to that, right? We guys are going to make Mother Earth meet our needs for profit, right? For development. Now, capitalism and communism have both done this, right? It's all been about industrialization. We are going to bend Mother Earth to our needs. Well, a different worldview is coming about now as people are starting to realize that that no longer functions. We're starting to realize that we need to be in relationship with Mother Earth. And to really get that relationship, we need to be paying attention to our own community, our own ecosystem, the forms of life that are around us now. We're starting to discover things about how our own health is deeply enmeshed in the health of the ecosystem. Things like we're just now noticing how much soil bacteria, how many different forms of microbes in the soil interact with the root systems, interact with invertebrates, and create this extraordinary vitality. And we only know a fraction of what's going on under the soil. But we're just starting to find out those incredible nature services that are doing things we couldn't have even imagined, including sequester carbon. Part of the solution to the climate crisis may be in allowing the soil to do its job well, which organic gardening, by the way, does, which sequesters carbon. And those microbes, many of those microbes, are also present in our own bodies. 9 out of 10 of the cells that we walk around with are actually not human cells. They're bacteria, they're all kinds of other small critters. So we are sort of in this amazingly odd way. We are related to the microbes in the soil. The microbes are also, if we're healthy, are also in our gut and keeping us able to digest food and to creating the nutrients that we need and the vitamins that we need to thrive. So we are just now starting to understand some of these things about how nature works. To quote Wendell Berry again, he says, "We must learn to acknowledge that creation is full of mystery. We will never entirely understand it. We must abandon arrogance and stand in awe. We must recover the sense of the majesty of creation and the ability to be worshipful in its presence. For I do not doubt that it is only on the condition of humility and reverence before the world that our species will be able to remain in it." So that's one feature of learning our sense of place, having that place to stand. The second is about the other people that we share that place with. Tim pointed out the ways in which we have a challenging future ahead of us. It's going to be the other people, the depth of the relationship, the ways that we learn to get along with each other that I think are going to make all the difference. So I want to tell you one more story from Suquamish. When I first moved there, back in the year 2000, one of my first encounters with my neighbors was when one of them came knocking on my door and saying, "We have to stand united against the tribe because they're trying to build housing in our neighborhood." This was quite a wake-up call for me because I thought, well, we're on a reservation. Wouldn't it be natural that they would build housing? Well, no, they don't. This was an enclave of non-native people, and they didn't want those people in their neighborhood. So there's a big meeting at the church. Hundreds of people showed up. There was one person after another saying why they didn't want this housing to go through. When I first got there, I was intimidated. I didn't know anybody. And I said, I'll just write a letter to the paper later on. I don't really want to get up in front of this crowd. But finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I got up and said, "I think it is right that the people of this land be able to build homes for their people." As a result of that, I met one of the elders from the tribe who happened to be in the back. I discovered later was in the back listening to this. Very embarrassing for me to realize that he had listened to all of those comments. So he introduced himself to me. We sort of exchanged a sense of exasperation and both went on our way. And then a few weeks later, Chief Seattle's grave was desecrated. This is the Suquamish people are the people of Chief Seattle. So again, I was new in town. I'm looking around to see, usually there's a church or somebody stands up, and then I was going to stand up with them. But nobody was standing up. There was no response except from the tribe. So after a few days of that, I looked around and asked my friends to join me in my living room, and we called a meeting in the church. And because I'd met Ted earlier, he vouched for us, our effort with other tribal elders. So as a group of native and non-native people got together and said, we've got to do something different here. So we stood with the tribe when they reconsecrated the grave. We put out a reward fund to see if we could figure out who had done the desecration. We never did find that out. And then we're kind of stuck. It was like, now what do? We have this incredibly divided community, all this animosity between the natives and non-natives. What do we do in the midst of this? I really had no idea. And Ted said, what we do is we celebrate. It's kind of counterintuitive. And we're not going to go out and fight the bad guys. No, we're going to celebrate. Because our community is so full of hardship. People are coming through all here all the time, like many reservations. We have poverty, we have substance abuse, we have, all kinds of issues. We don't need any more dwelling on those issues. What we need is to celebrate the leaders in our community who are making a difference. So that's what we started doing. We started holding a series of potlucks, and each time we would celebrate the people who were doing actually terrific work, but that most people didn't know about. One of my favorites is the librarian in the local elementary school who took a drainage ditch in the school playground and turned it into a beautiful wetland and grew native ferns and native cattails and stocked it with some fish, and pretty soon the birds were showing up. And then she brought in some of the native elders to teach the kids how to harvest those reeds and turn them into baskets. Another of my favorites was that there was a group of young people who carved the first cedar canoe that the reservation had had in decades. So we celebrated them. And we celebrated a young woman who was teaching people how to speak the native language, Lushootseed. So we celebrated, and we had a really good time. And one of the people who came to one of those celebrations was the father of that teacher. And a few weeks after one of those celebrations, I got a call from him. And he said, we're trying to get some land returned. We're trying to get Old Man House Park returned to the tribe. And we need some help. We need some collaborators. So to fill you in on what the significance of this is, this was a state park, but it was also the center of the Suquamish tribe's village for thousands of years, according to archaeological evidence as well as their oral traditions. It had the longest longhouse in the region. It was somewhere between 600 and 900 feet long. It had beautiful carved house posts that held it up. It's where Chief Seattle lived, as well as other major leaders of the Suquamish tribe over the years, as well as hundreds of other people. And it was a place where tribes from throughout the region used to come for big gatherings, because it was big and because the Suquamish tribe was known for hospitality. Well, shortly after Chief Seattle died, the Indian agent decided that this was not the way Native people should be living, and he had it burned down. So there's a story that his daughter, they called her Princess Angeline, when she heard, she was living in Seattle at the time, and she paddled her canoe over across Puget Sound, weeping the whole way, and shows up on the beach and takes water with her hands and pours it on the embers of this house, because by then that's all that was left. So the tribe rebuilt in that same location. They rebuilt, but did it the way the Indian agent wanted: separate houses, school, cemetery, all separate. And not too many years later, the military decided they needed the land because they needed to build fortifications to protect the Bremerton shipyards, which was inland. So they took the tribe's entire waterfront, including this village. And everybody had to leave, move elsewhere on the reservation. They never did build the fortifications. Instead, they sold it to a developer who divvied it up into little plots of land that turned out to be very nice for people to come over from Seattle and have little waterfront cabins. And by the way, speaking of understanding our own role, I live on one of those little plots of land. So a few of those plots had been purchased by the state because they understood the historic significance of Chief Seattle's home. After decades, 100 years after the military had taken it away, the tribe wanted this land back. And they'd wanted it back for a very long time, obviously, but each time they tried, the same people who had opposed them on the housing project had prevented that from happening. So this time our strategy was pretty simple. Those opposition folks had projected themselves as being representative of the non-tribal community. We simply outnumbered them. We did a statewide campaign. We got hundreds of people from the non-tribal community to support the tribe. We got letter writing, lobbying, showing up at meetings. We thought we had it made, but we kept hearing from the staff, we don't know if you're going to get this or not. So finally, there's the day of the final decision by the Parks Commission. We loaded up busfuls of people to go for what we called the ride of the century. We had to make it sound interesting to go to a hearing, right? The ride of the century, because it had been 100 years since the land was taken away. People from the Suquamish tribe showed up in their canoe, stood around the outer edge of the auditorium with their paddles in hand. People got up and one after another testified and testified and testified, both on both sides of the issue. And finally there was this sort of hushed moment when nobody knew what would actually happen. The Park Commission had a little conversation, then they took a vote, and then there was this pause like, did that just happen? Did they just unanimously agree to return this land to the tribe? And people realized, yeah, that's just what happened. And pretty soon the drums were going, and the tribe members from the canoe families they were beating the drums and singing, and all the elders were getting up and going to shake the hands of each member of the Parks Commission with tears streaming down their face. And the chairman of the Parks Commission is banging his gavel saying, wait a minute, we have other things on our agenda. But he pretty much as soon he gave up on that. And everybody's just weeping and hugging and drumming and singing, and then off we go in our buses back to Suquamish. Well, thank you for that. And you know, that was some of the hardest work I've ever done, but it was also some of the most joyous work I've ever done. It got me deeply involved and deeply aware of the history of a people who have been there much longer than I have been, and deeply humbled by what I learned and what I'm still learning from living among them. And one of the interesting outcomes of this is not that this division has continued, even though we did not compromise on the return of this land. The people who were worried about the park did get the chance to say their concerns and for their concerns to be incorporated in the tribe's management plan, but we always treated them with respect. We didn't always get respect back, but we always treated them with respect. And our community has transformed. This division has gone away. The people who used to think of their civic activity as being focused on opposing the tribe are now the mainstays of the garden club. And they plant beautiful flowers all over the community. They even raised some money to put up to hire a native carver to do some beautiful carving in one of our parks in town. And one last thing that was very unexpected for me is that I've been invited to participate in the annual canoe journey. So I actually get to go on those cedar carved canoes every year where the tribes go from one reservation to another and celebrate the continuation of this extraordinary culture. So that's just one of the ways. Every community has its own story. Every community has its own history. You know, if you think about where we came from, everybody in this country either came here unwillingly on a slave ship, has always been here, or their ancestors have, or we're immigrants. That's who we are. And every community has some mixture of those people. Everybody has their story. So one of the most powerful things we can do is to learn about one another, to learn one another's stories, to respect one another's cultures, to get that depth of understanding that then allows us to do work together, because we have so much work that we need to do together. So restoring relationships is absolutely key. It's foundational to anything else we hope to do. A second thing, based on this notion of having a place to stand, having that sense of community, A second thing is I think we're better positioned to resist when we have that sense of place. There's so much resistance to be done as the corporate juggernauts of all sorts try to transform our communities and our land into yet more profit. Whether that's stopping the megaloads, I imagine some of you are involved in that, stopping the coal trains out here in the Northwest, taking on Citizens United, stopping the Walmarts of the world from coming in and rolling over our local communities. There are so many things that we need to resist, and we gain a special moral authority when we do it from the perspective of our place. When we can say, this is where I take a stand, this is my home, you will not do this to our home. So we've got restoring relationships, we've got resistance to this corporate juggernaut. The third thing is we need to rebuild. We need to rebuild our communities, our economies, so that they can, in fact, meet our needs over the long term, so that they can provide what we need, livelihoods, food, clothing, shelter, within the constraints of a small planet. So what does that look like? Again, I want to tell you a couple of stories, this time from someplace really different from Ohio. I call it the tale of two Ohio cities. One of them is Canton, Ohio, where there is a large Walmart. And you may remember last fall there was a lot of controversy because the Walmart asked their employees to help fund to help provide food, to donate food for other employees who are hungry. This is a form of economy that's basically institutionalizing the notion that wages will be so low that people will not be able to make ends meet. And then they're asking employees who are already at that level to help out ones that are even more desperate. And this is a form of economy that relies on the public welfare system because people who work at Walmart have to get food stamps, they have to get public subsidies to make ends meet with the low salaries and the few hours that they're provided. So that's one direction our economy can go. And by the way, Walmart's is also one of the major forces that caused all the outsourcing outside of the United States, especially to China. Because to bring those prices down, they had to go to rock-bottom wage countries. So they were forcing their suppliers to outsource production in order to be able to sell to Walmart. So that's one sort of model of the economy of the future, although we know that that can't continue because we know where things are going in terms of the climate. Nonetheless, that is one way that we could continue for quite some time. Here's another Ohio city, Cleveland. You may have heard of the evergreen co-ops in Cleveland. We've written about them in Yes Magazine. This came out of a realization on the part of some people who were part of the local university, Case Western University, the Cleveland Clinic, the hospital. They realized that they were running some prosperous institutions, but within a sea of poverty, because all around them were very, very poor neighborhoods where people either didn't have jobs or were working now and then, but couldn't count on having work that they could actually support their family. And they said this makes no sense to have thriving institutions in a sea of poverty. And they collaborated with the Cleveland Foundation, with community groups, with some other folks from out of town, and they put together a series of worker co-ops. So the hospital needs laundry services. Why not buy it from a local worker co-op made up of worker owners from that neighborhood? When the laundry makes a profit, the money goes straight back into the neighborhood because it stays with the worker owners. When the salaries go up, the worker owners spend it in the local economy. And by the way, since they're people who care about their own environment, they're doing it very, very green. They don't want to be polluting their own water. Well, that worked so well, they started some other ones. They have now a solar electric co-op. They put solar panels on the roofs of the government buildings and the university and the clinic, and they sell the electricity to those institutions. So they lease the space on the rooftop, sell the electricity. You got a bunch more jobs in another worker co-op that's going. And a third one, they've got gigantic greenhouses so they can provide fresh fruit, fresh vegetables to the university and the hospital all winter long. And again, you have more jobs located in that neighborhood. They're not going anywhere. And as those workers are spending money into their community, then the services that those people need can ripple out into a thriving kind of an economy. So we need to be rebuilding the kind of an economy that can work for the long term where we are. We don't need to ask permission of the corporate world to do that. We just need to do it. And one really great tool is, I think you're discussing this in Oregon, the state bank. Is that true? Yeah, so state banks is a great way to get some of that jump started, because you can have a source of investment. When the state puts its money in a bank, rather than all that money going off to Wall Street, it can be channeled right back into the state, into getting these kinds of enterprises going. So that's the third thing. We've got restore relationships, we've got resist, and we've got rebuild. And the last one, I think we need to look seriously at, given how dire our climate situation is. The last one is resilience. Because we do know that things are going to change, and they could change in ways that we can't really predict. The weather weirding has already begun. We could see droughts, we could see floods, we could see wildfires. We don't know what combination of those will happen, and we don't know what that'll do to the underpinnings of civilization, whether that's our food supply or access to drinkable water. We don't know. And by the way, we do need to do everything we can to keep more carbon from going up in the atmosphere, because even though we're too late to stop the climate from changing, there is a difference between bad and really, really, really bad. And really, really, really bad could be something like a wave of extinction that includes human beings. That's a possibility. We don't know. So there's still a need to keep the carbon, to the degree we can, in the ground. That's really important. But we also need to get ready in our communities for what's coming. We do that in a far better way if we've done those other steps, if we've restored the relationships, if we understand how our local ecosystems work, if we've built up the knowledge to have relationships of reciprocity with that local ecosystem, if we're grounded in our place, if we have that sense of a place to stand, we'll be much better able to take on what comes next. So this might sound like, if you stay really focused on your place, on your community, whether that's a little town, whether that's a neighborhood, it might sound like you're turning your back on the global movement. And I think nothing could be further from the truth. Because I think we do better participating in national and global movements when we do that from a position of the strength of our local organizing and our local community. One example is the Via Campesina organization that's all over the world. Is made up of farmers, poor people. And they're working together, but they're very grounded in their own organizing in their own countries and in their own communities. But they're working together globally to do things like take on trade deals like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So yes to being part of global movements, but we can do that from that position of strength of having our place. We can essentially occupy our own communities. And while we're doing it, we can decolonize. We can get rid of some of those old worldviews that are keeping us back. That pioneer mentality of, we can always move on to some other place. Nature is just there for us to bend to our needs. We can get rid of that by working together and by occupying this new space that we're in. Paul Goodman once said, "Suppose you had the revolution you're talking and dreaming about. Suppose your side had won, and the kind of society that you wanted has arrived. How would you live, you personally, in that society? Start living that way now. When you run up against obstacles, then begin to think about how to get over or around or under that obstacle, or how to push it out of the way, and your politics will be concrete and practical." I think that's where we need to go. I think when we're grounded in that kind of community, we find the power that we have, the power that is built not by us being all by ourselves in front of a computer and hitting the petition button or hitting the, okay, I'll give you $25 button. The power we get from being in relationships with one another. And that's where we find the power to bring a whole new world into being. And if I have just one more minute, I want to ask if you would be willing to sing a song with me. Do you know the Holly Near song, We Are a Gentle, Angry People? Okay. Probably your voice is better than mine, so I'm going to step back from the microphone. But I'd like to ask you to join me. We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for our lives. Thank you very much.